The wind howled through the twisted trees of Devil's Den, carrying with it an eerie, almost human wail. Cole Archer tightened his grip on the steering wheel as the dirt road snaked deeper into the forest. His team had been dispatched to investigate the sudden disappearance of 4 hikers, seasoned outdoorsmen, who had vanished without a trace. But Devil's Den was no ordinary forest. It had a reputation for swallowing people whole. "We should have brought more than just ghost hunting gear," muttered Ryan, the team's tech expert, as the truck bounced over another pothole. He glanced nervously at the dense foliage that seemed to press in on them from all sides. The woods felt alive, watching, waiting. "You know what they say about this place, right?" Harper, the team's medium, said in a low voice. "They say the ground here is cursed. People vanish because something takes them." Cole didn't respond. He had heard the stories, but he wasn't one to buy into local legends. That was until the call came in. For men, all experienced hikers, gone without a trace. No bodies, no footprints, not even disturbed leaves. As the team arrived at the campsite where the hikers had last been seen, an unsettling silence greeted them. The air was thick with humidity, but it felt unnaturally cold. The tents were still standing, but there were no signs of life. "Where is everyone?" whispered Casey, the team's newest recruit, her voice trembling. Ryan set up the thermal cameras, but something was off. The readings were erratic, temperatures plummeting and spiking without reason. Suddenly, Harper stiffened. Her eyes widened as she stared at the tree-line. "Something's here," she whispered. "It's watching us." Before anyone could react, a low growl echoed from the darkness. The team spun around, flashlights slicing through the thick fog that had mysteriously settled over the camp. A figure stood at the edge of the woods, tall, gaunt, and unnaturally still. It didn't look human. "That's no hiker," Ryan muttered, backing up slowly. Then, in the blink of an eye, it moved fast, too fast. Cole barely had time to raise his weapon before the creature was gone, vanishing into the trees with a spine-chilling screech. "What the hell was that?" Casey gasped, her hand trembling as she gripped her flashlight. Harper's face was pale. "Shadowman," she whispered. "We've just seen a Shadowman." And with that, the investigation had just taken a terrifying turn. Cole wasted no time setting up camp after the encounter. They needed to regroup, figure out their next move. But as the team huddled together, Harper's words echoed in his mind. "Shadowman. Do you think it's what took the hikers?" Ryan asked, nervously scanning the tree line. "If it's a Shadowman, then we're in real trouble," Harper replied, her voice low. "They don't just kill, they take. Take them where?" Casey's voice was barely a whisper. "No one knows." Cole had seen enough weird cases to know that whatever they were dealing with, it was far more dangerous than they'd anticipated. But they couldn't turn back now. They had a job to do. As the night dragged on, the fog thickened, smothering the camp. It was the kind of darkness that seemed to absorb light, turning their flashlights into nothing more than glowing orbs in the void. Suddenly, the radios crackled to life. "Help me!" The voice was weak, broken by static, but unmistakable. It was one of the hikers. "Where's that coming from?" Ryan frantically checked the equipment. Harper's eyes rolled back into her head as she went into a trance. "He's close," she whispered, her voice distant. "But he's not whole." Cole motioned for the team to follow as they tracked the signal deeper into the woods. The air grew colder with each step, and an unnatural stillness settled over them. Then they saw movement in the shadows, a figure crawling toward them, dragging itself through the dirt. It was one of the missing hikers, his body mangled, his eyes wide with terror. But as they rushed toward him, something else emerged from the trees, something with glowing eyes and twisted limbs. "Run!" Cole shouted. The woods exploded into chaos as the creature lunged forward, its claws slashing through the air. Blood sprayed across the ground as one of the team members was dragged screaming into the darkness. And just like that, the hunt had begun. Cole's mind raced as he pushed forward, his heart pounding in his chest. The screams of his teammate, Jason, had been cut short just moments ago, leaving nothing but the ominous silence of Devil's Denver. The trees loomed tall, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal hands, casting eerie shadows in the dim moonlight. "Stay together," Cole barked, his voice strained with fear. But fear wasn't something he could afford right now. Not with whatever was hunting them lurking just beyond sight. Harper stumbled, gasping as a low growl echoed through the woods. "It's close," she whispered, her face pale in the weak light of her flashlight. "We need to move." Casey clutched her ghost-hunting gear like it was a lifeline, her eyes wide and darting from tree to tree. "What are we dealing with, Cole? That thing, it wasn't human." "I don't know," Cole muttered, his grip tightening on his rifle. "But I know it's not here for conversation." Ryan, the tech guy, fumbled with the thermal imaging camera, but the readings were useless. The temperature was fluctuating so wildly that the screen was filled with red and blue static, an unsettling kaleidoscope of colors that made no sense. "I'm getting nothing. No heat signatures, no movement," Ryan stammered. "It's like the damn forest itself is playing with us." Suddenly, Harper froze, her eyes wide. "Do you hear that?" The others strained to listen. At first, there was nothing, just the eerie rustle of leaves and the creak of branches in the wind. But then it came, a soft, distant wailing. It sounded like a child's cry. "It's a trick," Cole said immediately, grabbing Harper's arm before she could move toward the sound. "Don't follow it. Stay together." But the wailing grew louder, more desperate. It tugged at something primal, something that made every hair on the back of their necks stand on end. "Please, someone help me." Harper's face was pale as she turned to Cole. "That's a human voice." Before anyone could stop her, she bolted into the woods, running toward the sound of the cries. Cole cursed under his breath and chased after her, the others close behind. Branches scratched at their faces, roots tried to trip them, and the cold air burned their lungs. But Harper didn't slow down. The cries grew louder, more frantic, and then, without warning, they stopped. Harper skidded to a halt in a small clearing, her chest heaving with exertion. The others caught up, panting, and looked around. The clearing was empty, too empty. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I heard them. They were right here." Cole raised his flashlight, scanning the trees. "Harper, we need to." A deafening shriek pierced the air, and suddenly, the ground beneath them erupted. A figure shot out from the dirt, a twisted, decayed body with long, sharp claws. Its hollow eyes glowed a sickly green as it lunged at them. Cole fired his rifle, but the bullets did nothing. The creature's scream filled the clearing as it dragged one of its long, talon-like fingers across Ryan's back. Blood sprayed into the air. Ryan dropped to the ground, writhing in agony. "Get back!" Cole shouted, pulling Harper away as Casey screamed. But the creature didn't retreat. It wanted more. The woods seemed alive now. Each tree swayed in rhythm with the wind that had suddenly turned into a violent howl. The air tasted of copper and rot. The creature that had attacked Ryan wasn't just a mindless killer. It was something older, something ancient, a guardian of this cursed land. Casey knelt beside Ryan, pressing her hands against the bleeding wound on his back. "Stay with me, Ryan," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "Just hold on." Ryan groaned, his face contorted in pain. "It's not going to stop, is it?" Harper stood still, her eyes unfocused, like she was listening to something beyond their reach. "There's more coming," she said softly, her words chilling everyone to the bone. "We can't stay here," Cole ordered, grabbing Harper by the shoulder. "We move now, or we're all dead." "But where do we go?" Casey asked, panic rising in her voice. "There's no safe place here." The creature was gone, but the shadows around them seemed to pulse with life. Cole knew they were being hunted by more than one entity now. It wasn't just about the missing hikers anymore. They had stirred something far worse, something hungry. As they moved deeper into the woods, following no path but instinct, a sharp crack echoed through the trees. Cole raised his rifle, scanning the darkness, but there was nothing, only the oppressive silence that followed them like a predator. Then, without warning, a figure materialized in front of them. Tall, dark, its face obscured by shadows, but its presence undeniable. The Shadowman. It towered over them, its form stretching unnaturally, as if it didn't belong to this plane of existence. "Run," Cole whispered, but his voice seemed swallowed by the very air around them. Before they could react, the Shadowman raised a hand, and the darkness around them began to swirl, alive, writhing. And then the screams began. This wasn't just a haunting anymore. It was a slaughter. The Shadowman vanished into the mist, but its presence lingered in the choking air, a dark force creeping through every nerve of the team. Cole's hands trembled as he reloaded his rifle, his mind unable to comprehend the horror they had just faced. The others stood in a daze, the woods pressing in on them like a prison. Ryan's condition had worsened. His skin had taken on a pale, bluish tint, and dark veins spiderwebbed across his body from the wound on his back. Casey was kneeling beside him, her face twisted in desperation. "We need to get him out of here," Casey begged, her voice barely above a whisper. Cole shook his head. "There's no way out, not until we know what we're up against." Harper stood apart from the group, staring into the black woods. Her fingers twitched as if trying to grasp something unseen. "We stirred it," she muttered under her breath, her eyes vacant. "This place, it's alive and it wants us." Cole ignored her as he pulled out the thermal imaging device, trying to get a reading. The screen flickered with distorted colors, blue, red, yellow, but nothing consistent. Then the temperature dropped sharply, and a thick fog began to roll in from all sides. "We've got to move. Now," Cole ordered. But as they gathered their gear, the fog became impossibly dense, wrapping around them like a wet, suffocating blanket. They could barely see more than a few feet ahead. Worse, the air had turned foul, reeking of rot and decay. Then came the sound, a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the fog itself. "Do you hear that?" Harper whispered, her voice tinged with madness. Suddenly, Ryan began convulsing violently, his body jerking uncontrollably. His eyes rolled back into his head, and his mouth opened in a silent scream. Casey screamed and tried to hold him down, but it was no use. His body arched, his skin bubbling like it was being burned from the inside. "We need paramedics," Casey yelled. "He's dying." But as soon as the words left her lips, the fog around them shifted, and multiple figures began to emerge, tall, twisted silhouettes moving through the mist like predators. Crawlers. Their hunched, elongated forms slithered on all fours, their eyes glowing faintly in the fog. "Oh God," Casey whimpered. "They're coming." Cole raised his rifle, but his hands were shaking too much to aim properly. The crawlers moved fast, their limbs snapping with unnatural speed as they closed the distance. Without thinking, Cole fired. The bullet tore through the fog, striking one of the creatures square in the chest. But it didn't stop. The crawler let out a blood-curdling screech and lunged forward, slamming into Cole and knocking him to the ground. Harper screamed as the crawlers surrounded them, their long claws tearing through the air, ripping into flesh. Blood sprayed into the mist, and the once quiet woods erupted into chaos. One by one, the team was being torn apart. Cole struggled beneath the weight of the creature pinning him down, its rotting breath hot on his face. He swung the butt of his rifle up, smashing it into the creature's jaw, but it barely flinched. They were going to die here. Ryan's body went limp, just as a piercing wail echoed through the woods, a sound so haunting that it seemed to freeze everything in place. The crawlers stopped their assault, their heads snapping upward in unison. For a moment, the clearing was silent, the mist swirling lazily around the bloodied team. Then the ground beneath them began to tremble. A deep, rumbling sound emanated from the earth, and the fog parted like a veil, revealing a massive black hole opening in the ground not far from where they stood. It was as if the very earth was splitting open to swallow them whole. Cole scrambled to his feet, pulling Harper and Casey with him. "Move. Now." But Harper was frozen, her eyes wide as she stared at the abyss. "It's calling us," she whispered. Cole didn't care. He grabbed her by the arm and dragged her away from the chasm as the crawlers began to stir again, their glowing eyes locked onto the opening in the earth. "Leave her," Casey shouted. "We have to go." But as they started to retreat, the ground gave way beneath them. With a sickening lurch, the earth crumbled, and they all fell, plummeting into the darkness below. The fall seemed endless, the air rushing past them like a scream. They tumbled through the void, unable to see, hear, or even breathe. Just when it felt like they would fall forever, they hit the ground with a bone-shattering thud. Cole gasped, The wind knocked from his lungs as he struggled to his feet. They were in a massive underground cavern, the walls slick with black, pulsating veins that seemed to beat like a heart. Dim light flickered from strange, glowing fungi that clung to the rock, casting eerie shadows. Harper was sprawled on the ground, groaning in pain. Casey was already up, holding her arm, clearly broken. But something else was there, deep in the cavern. A presence darker than anything they had faced above. It pulsed, a thick, suffocating force that pressed in on them, making it hard to think. And then it spoke. "You've come to feed the earth." The voice was a low, guttural rasp, vibrating through the stone walls, filling the air with a sense of impending doom. It was ancient, powerful, and hungry. They weren't alone. The air in the cavern felt heavy, thick with moisture and something darker, more sinister. The voice that had spoken moments earlier seemed to echo endlessly, reverberating through the hollowed stone as if the very walls were alive. Cole struggled to stand, his vision blurring. His limbs felt like lead, weighed down by a presence that clung to them like an invisible parasite. "Get up!" Casey hissed, her voice barely audible through the suffocating silence. "We need to move. Now." Harper, dazed and clutching her arm, looked around the eerie space. The glowing fungi on the walls cast long, distorted shadows that seemed to move independently, writhing like spectral figures in the darkness. Then the whispers began. They started as a faint murmur, like wind blowing through distant trees. But it quickly became apparent that these were voices, many voices, whispers of the dead, of those who had come before them. They spoke in fragmented sentences, half-heard cries of pain and terror, warnings mixed with anger. "Help me! Turn back! Too late, too late!" The words scraped at their sanity, gnawing at their minds like a hungry animal. Harper clutched her head, trying to drown out the whispers, but they only grew louder. "What the hell is this place?" Casey whispered, her voice shaking. Cole's eyes darted to the far end of the cavern, where the walls seemed to pulse, alive with movement. Something was stirring in the shadows, a shape tall and skeletal, its body a grotesque fusion of bone and shadow. It stepped forward, and the temperature in the cave dropped to near freezing. The figure, humanoid but twisted and deformed, let out a low, guttural growl. The Shadowman had found them. It moved unnaturally fast, its limbs bending at impossible angles as it glided toward them. Casey raised her weapon, but her hands were trembling too violently to get a clean shot. Before she could pull the trigger, the ground beneath them trembled once again. From the cavern floor, black tendrils began to rise, thin, clawed roots that writhed and twisted as they reached for the team. They slithered around Harper's legs, dragging her to the ground. "Get them off!" she screamed, thrashing wildly as the tendrils coiled tighter around her body, dragging her toward the center of the cavern. Cole rushed to her side, pulling at the inky black roots with all his strength. They were cold to the touch, like frozen steel, and they burned his skin as he tried to pry them loose. But it was no use. The Shadowman was getting closer. The creature let out a horrifying, distorted scream as it raised its clawed hand. Cole barely had time to react before the hand came crashing down. He rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding being impaled by the creature's claws. Casey was shouting something, but it was lost in the cacophony of whispers and the shriek of the Shadowman. All Cole could think of was Harper, her body almost completely engulfed by the tendrils, her terrified eyes begging for help as she was pulled toward the gaping maw of darkness at the center of the cavern. In a desperate move, Cole reached for his belt and pulled out a flare. He ignited it and threw it toward the Shadowman. The flare exploded in a blinding flash of light, and for the briefest moment, the cavern was illuminated. The creature recoiled with a screech, its form dissolving into shadow, and the tendrils retreated. "Run!" Cole shouted, grabbing Harper's arm as he hauled her to her feet. The light from the flare was already fading, and the cavern was quickly plunging back into darkness. But as they ran, the ground trembled again, and Cole knew deep down they hadn't escaped the worst yet. The team stumbled through the twisting corridors of the underground labyrinth, their breaths ragged, fear gnawing at their every step. The walls, slick with some kind of dark slime, pulsed like veins, making the passageways seem alive, breathing and watching them. Every few steps, They would hear the distant screech of the Shadowman echoing through the tunnels, growing closer with each passing moment. How much further? Harper gasped, limping as she clutched her injured arm. Cole glanced at the map on his wrist device, the digital screen flickering erratically. The technology was malfunctioning in the presence of the malevolent energy in the air. We should be nearing the surface, but this place is warping. I don't. His words were cut off as the tunnel split ahead of them into 3 identical passageways. This is insane, Casey muttered. It's like the whole place is shifting around us. We're trapped in some kind of living nightmare. The decision had to be made fast. No time to think, just to act. Cole chose the center tunnel, leading the others through as fast as their legs would carry them. The air grew colder, and a foul stench filled the space like rotting flesh. Then they saw it. Ahead of them, bathed in a sickly green glow, stood a massive black gate embedded in the rock. Strange symbols, ancient and malevolent, were carved into its surface. It pulsed with energy, radiating malice. Casey stepped forward cautiously. "What is that?" "It's not just a gate," Harper whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "It's a seal. Something's trapped behind it." Before they could process what she had said, the ground split open beneath them, and out crawled the crawlers, hunched feral figures with glowing eyes and razor-sharp claws. They poured out of the earth in droves, their screeches deafening. The team opened fire, but for every one they shot down, 2 more appeared, their eyes burning with hunger. "We're not getting out of here alive," Casey shouted, panic overtaking her voice as the crawlers closed in. The gate began to hum, and the symbols on it flared to life, bathing the cavern in an eerie light. The crawlers hesitated, as if afraid of what was behind it, and then it hit Cole. "The gate, it's not a seal to keep something in," Cole said, his voice hoarse with realization. "It's a doorway to the other side." The Shadowman appeared in the distance, its distorted figure moving swiftly toward the gate. The ground shook violently as the world around them began to fracture. Cole looked at the others, fear in his eyes. "We have to go through it." The cavern roared with chaos as the gate pulsed, its symbols casting a sickly glow across the walls. The crawlers hesitated at the edges, their eyes reflecting fear for the first time. The Shadowman's form loomed closer, its unnatural movements jerking as it approached the gate, like a puppet pulled by invisible strings. Cole's heart pounded in his chest. He looked at the team. Harper's face was pale and drenched in sweat. Casey's eyes were wide with terror, and his own legs trembled beneath him. "We have no choice," he whispered, more to himself than the others. "We go through." "What the hell do you mean, go through?" Casey barked, her voice breaking under the weight of the situation. "We don't even know where that thing leads." "We know one thing," Harper said, her voice shaky but resolute. "It's either this or we die right here, torn apart by those things." She gestured to the crawlers, still prowling around the edges, waiting for the right moment to strike. The Shadowman let out a piercing shriek, and suddenly the crawlers attacked. They swarmed forward, claws flashing in the eerie light. Casey fired wildly into the horde, dropping several of them, but it wasn't enough. They were getting closer, their fetid breath hot on their skin. "Now!" Cole screamed, rushing forward toward the gate. His mind screamed at him to stop, to turn around, to face the monsters rather than whatever waited beyond. But his legs kept moving, driven by sheer adrenaline. He reached the gate, feeling the strange, pulsing energy radiating from it, like a live wire humming in the air. Without thinking, he stepped through. For a moment, there was nothing. No sound, no light, just an overwhelming sense of cold and darkness, like falling into an endless void. Then the world twisted, wrenching him forward, and suddenly he was standing in a new place. A place that should not exist. Harper and Casey tumbled through behind him, crashing to the ground. They scrambled to their feet, looking around, their eyes wide with disbelief. The landscape was a nightmare. They stood in a vast, decayed version of the cavern they had just left. The walls dripped with black ooze, and the air was thick with the stench of death. Twisted, skeletal trees clawed at the sky, and the ground beneath their feet shifted unnervingly. What is this place?" Harper stammered, her voice trembling with fear. "I think we're inside it," Cole replied, his voice low. Inside the gate, a low growl echoed through the air, sending a shiver down their spines. They weren't alone. The darkness around them moved, shapes flitting just beyond the edge of their vision. Suddenly, a massive figure stepped into view, an even larger version of the Shadowman, its body twisted and grotesque, its eyes burning with rage. It let out a guttural roar, and the ground shook beneath their feet. "This is it," Cole said, his voice grim. "We either face this thing, or we die." As the monstrous Shadowman charged, the team steeled themselves for the final fight. The Shadowman rushed at them, its grotesque form twisting in impossible ways as it closed the distance. Harper, bleeding and terrified, raised her weapon, hands shaking uncontrollably. "Shoot!" Cole yelled, but his own voice barely registered in the chaotic roar of the monstrous creature bearing down on them. Harper squeezed the trigger. Bullets sliced through the air, hitting the Shadowman squarely in its center. The impact sent it staggering back, a high-pitched screech reverberating through the twisted landscape. But it wasn't enough to stop it. The creature lunged again, faster this time, its arms stretching out like shadows to grab them. Harper screamed as one of its claws grazed her, ripping through her jacket and slicing her skin. Blood splattered the ground as she staggered back. Casey launched a flare, the bright light temporarily disorienting the creature. It reeled back, hissing violently. "It's vulnerable to light," she yelled. "Keep it off balance." The flare's glow was fading fast, though, and as the light dimmed, the Shadowman recovered, its towering form looming once again. Behind it, more crawlers appeared, dozens of them, their eyes glowing with a malevolent hunger as they closed in. "There's too many," Harper cried out, desperation rising in her voice. "We won't make it." Cole knew she was right. The crawlers and the Shadowman were surrounding them, cutting off any path to escape. They were trapped in this hellish dimension, with no way out. He glanced around, searching for any advantage, any weakness in their enemies. Then he saw it, a faint light glowing at the far end of the decayed cavern, just beyond the Shadowman. A door or a portal, or maybe something more. It was their only chance. "There!" he shouted, pointing to the distant glow. "We need to make it to that light. It's our only way out." Casey didn't hesitate. She fired another round at the crawlers, creating a brief opening. "Move! Move!" she yelled, leading the charge toward the light. The Shadowman let out a deafening screech and gave chase, its monstrous limbs crashing through the cavern. The ground trembled violently as it moved, knocking rocks and debris loose from the ceiling. Cole grabbed Harper, helping her limp forward as fast as they could. Behind them, the crawlers swarmed, their claws raking the ground just inches from their feet. The light grew brighter as they neared the end of the cavern. Cole could feel the pull of it now, a strange, warm sensation that felt out of place in the cold, decayed world they were in. But it was their only hope. With one final burst of energy, they reached the light. Cole dove through first, pulling Harper and Casey with him, just as the Shadowman lunged at them. Everything went black. For a moment, there was nothing. No sound, no movement, just the cold void. Then suddenly they were outside, gasping for breath, lying on the cold earth of Devil's Den. They had made it, but the screams from the cavern still echoed in their minds, and they knew the evil that lurked inside Devil's Den wasn't gone. It was merely waiting for the next unfortunate souls to wander too close.